Thank you.
So none of that will be captured except for me saying this right here. All right, you're on. Go ahead.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and I don't think we have any public attendees at the moment, so it's okay that we're starting a couple minutes late. Yeah, and I'll just say a quick intro and then see if others have anything to add. But thanks for joining this small group to talk through some of the economic aspects of AI issues related to the AI task force for Maine. I think we've all been on the larger calls, but it probably makes sense if we just go around, just give a quick name and title, and what brought you to the group, and then we can talk a little bit about today's meeting and the topic. So I'm Phoenix McLaughlin. I'm the Director of Strategy Implementation for the Department of Economic and Community Development, and I'm helping staff the group. And I'll pass it down to Dan Matz, the other staff side of things.
Hi, everybody. I believe I've met everyone, and thank you again for your patience on the technical side of things. Dan Matz, in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future. This is, I believe, if I'm counting right, I believe this is the sixth of these subgroup meetings that I have attended over the last week and a half. So happy to be here for note taking, for idea bouncing, and if there are questions about what other people are talking about, I may have some insights there, but passing it along. I guess I'll pass it to Sasha in there.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. So I am the Chief Technology Officer at Vex, which is a Maine-based company for those of you who don't know. Their mission is to simplify the business of running a business. But more importantly, I've been involved in AI machine learning for like 25 years throughout my career. And my role as such is to be an advisor from a tech perspective, to any of the topics that we might end up discussing. I'm not necessarily an expert in economic like policy and also which industries are the ones which we could pursue, but that's something that I look to learn and engage in with all of you on this topic. And I'll pass it to Emily.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Braley, and I am the Merck Program Coordinator for Maine Technology Institute. I'm here on behalf of MTI's President, Brian Whitney. Merck has done some interesting things. We're trying to now educate MTI's portfolio, those who are perhaps not tech inclined and not in our information technology sector, on artificial intelligence with a partnership with Coursera. So I look forward to maybe talking and sharing about that. And I will pass this off to Michael.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Odokaraokibo. I'm the CEO of ESM Global. We focus on IT security penetration of IT solutions. We've also received NSF funding to build the first multilingual African language AI translation database. So we're in the IT and African language learning and AI translation space. And I'm very, very interested and looking forward to connecting with you all and having this conversation. And I don't know if Daniel's available, but I'll pass it on to Daniel if he is.
Yeah, I just got back from voting. So I get to skip another set of floor speeches. I'm Dan Sayre. I represent Kenny Bunk in the House. I'm in my second term in the House of Representatives. My background's actually in book publishing for science and technology, including about 15 years editing college level textbooks for engineers and computer scientists. And I got on the AI task force because I know how to spell AI.
Great, thank you all. So I think to start off, I just wanted to share a couple things. One, I'll just briefly put up the agenda that I had proposed, just so we can get a sense of what we'll be doing here this afternoon. Although this is certainly flexible, and this is probably kind of hard to read on your screen, so I'm going to resize this window here for 1 moment. So I want to talk about a little bit about just kind of the plan for this group. It's a small group, obviously, which I think is good, and we have kind of a task before us in terms of getting some ideas together for the task force as a whole. And for today, though, I think really we can spend the most of the time kind of talking through some of these questions around what are the opportunities? What are some of the risks, and what potential policy tools do we have on this issue of AI in Maine's economy? But really the goal, I think, of just today is to try to end with some sense of, what are ideas that we want to pursue between now and the next meeting, that, myself and Dan, but also all of you, I think, can help kind of look into, in terms of what recommendations do we potentially want to bring back to the group. So I don't think today we're going to figure all that out, but it's more just trying to identify what points, ideas, questions we want to explore more, between now and then. I was imagining this would be relatively open-ended, in terms of, we don't have like presentations prepared or anything like that. I think if there are particular thoughts that you want to share, then please do so. But I think the idea is to have a relatively open-ended conversation about what ideas might be worth pursuing. And just to share one other thing, which I know you've also seen before, is just a reminder of the timeline that we're working with. As this is that roadmap piece that I think Scott and the chairs shared previously, that's just showing, kind of our overall timeline for this work, because the idea is that we'd be, for our purposes, right, we'd be discussing, we want our potential recommendations to the group ready for the full group's discussion in September, which means basically this summer we have to kind of come up with some ideas. And Dan, Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we necessarily need like full, legislation or something drafted by the end of the summer, but just some kind of ideas to put on the table. And my thought with that, and it's certainly open to others in the group, and such, and I know you offered to kind of help guide some of this as well, but just but generally for the group, the thought would be we kind of use this meeting to identify some of the ideas that we want to look more into. In July, at some point, we meet to actually think of like what would the recommendations be, start getting that together, and then in August we meet one more time to kind of pin those down, and then decide, come to agreement on what we actually want to give to the full group. So that is what I was thinking organizationally and logistically. How's everyone feel about that? Does that make sense? Is that what you were expecting?
Yeah, I believe so. I think and I believe the document that you had also shared to provide some structure in how to go about discussing, like our time today, was extremely valuable. So it felt
Right.
good to go through with that orientation, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in to say from a logistical perspective, I think that's very much in line with what the other groups have been discussing, and I think to your point, Phoenix, this is not, the deliverable here is not a sort of long entire report section here. I think we're really looking for, it could be as simple as bullet notes or sort of simple ideas that that go towards the questions that we talked about when we first had a meeting on this topic in March, I believe, something around there, February or March, and hopefully then could bring to the rest of the group in the fall, and start to get more and more sort of polished and cleaned up from there. But looking forward to it.
Can we share our ideas now?
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Let's get into it.
Perfect. Yeah, I've been running at some ideas I have because I've been thinking about it. So there are 5 ideas I personally have. I think we're blessed to have Emily with MTI here because MTI has also been such an advocate for small businesses, and I represent the small and medium business sectors, and we have definitely been helped and elevated in multiple different ways from MTI. So, I'll break into the thoughts I have with that, but first, number one, the AI talent shortage and brain drain. In the state of Maine, we don't have a lot of AI talent in the state. Many graduates, especially, I mean, we do have Northeastern University here, but a lot of the talent also go away. I don't know the percentage exactly, but we can always find those figures. So getting state-backed AI fellowships, like incentivizing AI grants for grads to stay in Maine could be very, very beneficial. AI-focused curriculum in the public sectors, universities like USM, University of Maine, Orono, having more AI curriculum could be very, very favorable for people to want to come to the state of Maine, as there are a lot of younger people moving to the state. I think we're all realizing it now. And also having ways to, I don't know if it's available in this climate, but having like visa friendly programs that can attract people from international to study in Maine when it comes to AI. Make AI a hub and nexus for education could be very, very helpful with the talent shortage. Our next thought was helping AI startups in infrastructure. So we are blessed to have MTI in the conversation. MTI is very innovative when it comes to giving money towards small businesses. They were the first entity to give us money for our African language platform, and also help invest in our applying for the NSF, which we've been blessed to receive. So incentivizing the startup infrastructure, so investing in MTI or having state entities that focus on AI that are just like MTI could be very, very helpful, whether in our metropolitan areas or in our rural areas. As well as a main AI venture catalyst could be really, really good. I find the venture space to be really like an old boys club in the state of Maine. So making it more inclusive and having AI innovative money going to, I think you guys know what I'm trying to say. Give money to these venture entities that are funding innovative research and development on the AI space. That's our number two. Our number three is adopting low AI adoption in key sectors like in education and health. Sometimes it's not easy for these businesses, like let's say WEX. You know, WEX is a huge company. It's not always easy for them to innovate really quickly when it comes to starting pilot programs. They already have a lot going on, so create incentives for these big companies, for these medium-sized companies to have these pilot programs, have these services. I can say for, myself, we are an African language learning AI translation database that we're building. We want to get into hospitals, we want to get into schools, we want to be able to be helpful, but it's hard for these entities to change. So having ways for the government to help that and incentivize that could be helpful. Number four is the ethical and regulatory gaps that are available. We kind of lack AI regulations because a lot of states are. It's brand new, but establishing like an ethic task force or ethical audits on AI deployment for the state of Maine, that could be also very, very helpful. And then five, we have a lot of rural areas in the state of Maine, so creating that digital divide or helping that digital divide could be very, very helpful as well. Bring tools that the state of Maine offers. It could be on the governor's website or the state of Maine website that offers tools for people in rural areas to elevate themselves with AI. Access grants, culturally inclusive AI programs. So those are the 5 ideas that we had.
All right, coming strong out of the gate, I think, with some well thought through pieces. Yeah, thanks for that. Were you going to say something, Sachin?
No, nothing. I was just going to say the same. I think absolutely everything, Michael, you shared strongly resonates with me, and I'm assuming with everybody. So really awesome. I couldn't agree more that when it comes to AI talent, venture or some kind of support for SMBs, and also some incentive structure for even larger enterprises which don't need get off the ground kind of funding, but are established businesses but need reinvention. I think all of those 3 categories in particular, hugely supportive of that, and absolutely we do need the regulatory framework and all of those things. So I think all your top 5 resonate very strongly. Thanks for sharing. Who would
Michael,
like
can
to
I?
go?
Oh, sorry. Can I follow up on one of them, Michael? I just the question about incentives for sort of piloting in new places, and you mentioned going into a hospital or something of that nature. I mean, I just want to like flesh out what that kind of might end up looking like. Is that something that you're like, um, I guess when you're thinking about going into a new place, like piloting in a hospital or a larger school or something, what is the like, what are the challenges and the hurdles to doing that we could think about ways to go? I'm just trying to drill down a little because I think it's a great idea. I just want to figure out what the specific is there.
Sure. Yeah, there are a few different ways. So incentivizing mentor-mentee opportunities with people who work in businesses could be an opportunity. Like for instance, again, we are an African language AI translation database, and I've gone to the hospital with my mom and heard off the side someone requesting a Lingala translator, a live translator, and it was like, wow, wouldn't it be easier if someone knew that we have the technology to actually to do those different technologies, but I don't know the pipeline in order to reach out to anybody. So a mentor-mentee program could be potentially beneficial. Um, having I don't know. I mean, there's a lot. I would have to think, but there's a lot that could be very very helpful. We can even have partners like MTI to help facilitate those partnerships as well. Have conferences. You know, I've been going to different AI conferences, so having an AI conference in the state of Maine to connect buyers with suppliers as well, and incentivizing both entities. There's a lot.
Yeah, if I may add to what Michael you were saying and just share some of the Vex experiences, I believe if we take a step back and think about the ability of AI to enable productivity for all kinds of cognitive tasks that we have in many different settings. And if we say, like, hey, how about we set a productivity goal that maybe we should enable 30% productivity based on AI, or and for different industries or areas, it could be a different marker for based on some case study that we could do. But then based on that, I think creating an incentive program for those industries to adopt AI technology to get a way to measure productivity and for them to be able to get to that could be a good way to go. That's what worked, for Vex internally, for instance. Like, let's say if you want to think about our sales organization, marketing organization, engineering organization, even finance, recruiting, HR, across the board, we found tremendous leverage in adopting AI in the way the work happens. But it's tough because current processes and systems are very well established and set, and people are so used to them and very productive in the way they drive things in the current ways. So driving change is a hard thing, and having incentives and also some good potential examples of proof points based on smaller pilots or case studies just goes such a long way in creating the energy to pursue, a change. But once you see things start to work, I think then it has a good positive flywheel effect, and you see the change come through in organizations because they themselves experience the benefits of doing that. Actually, one thing I was curious about, Michael, I think the fifth point that you talked about, I think rural communities and being inclusive. Any more thoughts on that? Because that's I know, pretty important topic for the state of Maine overall, from what research I did, and curious about any other color you may have on that.
Yeah, we've all been up north, and up north is, there's some places that don't have electricity. There's some places that it's hard to get, different things. So find ways to also make AI inclusive to those areas, whether it's for farming, different grants if you're able to provide, if you're able to utilize and elevate your farming expertise or your practices with AI. Things where the government can just incentivize inclusion and elevation in rural areas to me is very important. Mostly, I think what could be helpful are tools like AI tools, whether it's for education, whether it's for disaster response. We had a few, I think a flooding disaster last year. So if AI could be helpful in that, could be really great. In the public sector as well, some hospitals are far away from places in different areas in rural Maine. So utilizing as AI as tools could be helpful.
Yep, makes sense. Great. Anyone else wants to go next? I have some thoughts. Why don't I just share this document? Ooh, looks like I can't do screen sharing. Is there a way I could share my screen or document?
I think Dan's on it.
Can you, it says that you should be able to.
Yep, I can do it
Okay,
now. I
perfect.
see. Am I sharing the right screen? Hold on.
Yeah.
Is it this one? I'm not seeing on my end. Hold on. Let me share it
We
again.
could see it.
Yeah, I think I can see that.
Somehow it doesn't. I have too many tabs open. It doesn't show me what I'm sharing. So I'm just. Yeah, I think this probably is a more refined version. Is this those where I'm scrolling? Yeah, perfect. Now I can see it. Okay, so I cheated on this topic a bit. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but what I did is I leveraged a reasoning model. It's the O3 model of OpenAI, and I asked it that, hey, this is the topic that we have at hand. We're trying to figure out the economic like policy framework for the state of Maine. What should we pursue? What industry should we target? What would be the big things to go? So it thought for a mere 2 minutes and 15 seconds and arrived at this output, which actually I found pretty helpful and resonated with me and some of the other research I was just doing. So I thought I'll just share this and just talk through this because it might be helpful. So first thing is to the question I think Phoenix you had posted, what are the areas that we should focus on, the industries where Maine should lead in innovation with AI. I think the answer of having the natural resource sectors of forestry, ocean, bio-based materials, clean energy, um, those seem like areas where we should focus on. And I'll just scroll down a bit, because it elaborates, down here. Hopefully, all of these things resonate. So the blue economy platforms, precision forestry, biomanufacturing, genomic and life sciences AI, where I believe Maine has some like leadership role in those areas as well. And then a sustainable data center ops, I think, is an interesting, maybe new add. I did not see a lot of context on it in my other research. So let me stop it. There is more, but those were the main areas that emerged, from the AI engine and also some of the homework that I was doing. So I thought I'll start with these to say, do these sound like the right ones based on previous work that we have done or research, or are there things that are missing or we should add uh, to the focus areas of industries?
Yeah, I would say for industries, I mean, it's pretty similar to the ones that come up a lot. I mean, there are different ones. There are different ways to slice it, right? MTI has set sectors. We tend to highlight different sectors in different programs and so on. But I think the typical categories are forest products, marine economy, life sciences, and we have a particular cluster around animal life sciences. But there are, I guess there's a couple layers, whether we're talking about kind of technology driven sectors broadly, which I think can be again a little broader, or thinking through what specific ones might mean have a competitive advantage when thinking about how to apply these types of tools. And I would probably lean towards those first three that you have on the list there. Yeah, like you said, I'm not as familiar with the sustainable data center ops piece, but I think that broadly those first three are ones that we would typically point to. But I'm curious what others think as well.
Any
I think these are really good. It's interesting to think if we also want to propose Maine also focusing on a sector that Maine is known for, like we're known for fishing, we're known for protecting the environment, our forestry. That could also be an option. We could also potentially focus on areas that are being cut by the government already. We are seeing budget cuts um, in chronic disease prevention, environmental health. So there are a few different avenues where we can take it, but I think Sasha, these are good jumping off points to think about.
Yeah, I wanted to give a thumbs up to the top three. I think the fourth is going to be tough just because of the cost of energy in Maine. Um, uh, but the other three intersect with sectors of importance and sectors of opportunity in Maine's economy already. So it's a vote to hone in on the top three and maybe sidebar. I'm just not concerned. I'm not sure about the feasibility of the fourth.
Got it. Yeah, I agree. I think on the fourth, I'll just I think the first three seem like strongly, obvious and just everything, the previous research and everything. So I feel I think all of us seem to be in alignment unless there is any other question. On the fourth one, I just wanted to say a couple of things on based on some of the other homework like research I was doing on this. So data center technology has two aspects. It's one, power hungry, right? So that's a critical requirement if you want to pursue creating new data centers. And I think that's the challenge with Maine, that I don't think we have enough like power as such in the state. So it might be a blocker and hence can't pursue. But there's just another side to it, which is cooling technologies are really important for data centers because they generate a lot of heat. And Maine, just where our geography is such that it is naturally conducive for water cooled or air cooled or any kind of those technologies to be leveraged. So if the power problem could be solved at any point in the future, then I think it's something that's worth considering. If that's a blocker, then I do not think it'll be viable. But that's like where it sits right now. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. I think just moving on. I'll just see. I don't want to read through the whole thing, but I just want to say areas that I think this one I felt is a worthy topic in terms of enabling aspects. So we obviously have through the MTI Institute and other like government endeavors, good support system, like ways in which we can pursue it. But something that Michael said, the AI ready workforce deficit is a huge area clearly where the number of jobs that we expect, to be there in AI versus the skilled, workforce that we have. There's a massive deficit, I believe, if we can project that. So that's going to be really important. I think the other aspect is I do not know how good are we in terms of infrastructure. So broadband connectivity with, let's say, the big cloud computing companies, which have the foundational models and all of those things, which most likely most AI technologies would need some level of that connection, that compute resources, whether that be Amazon or Azure or any of these GCP or etc. So I think that's something that also emerged that maybe is an area that has been an ongoing focus but needs to continue and probably would get more pronounced because the compute requirements that are there in AI is much more significant. So that is worthy, and obviously the SMB tech adoption is a huge area. I think for Maine that would be important. I think Michael pointed out all of those things already. Yeah, I think the rest of it is things that we can discuss separately. But I just wanted to share what kind of emerged from the high level research using AI itself. So I'll probably stop sharing this document.
I would just say if you and Michael and anyone else, if you already had kind of written thoughts, please do share those afterwards. I think that would be helpful.
Phoenix, can I share one thing that it came out naturally in a conversation I had a few days ago with a sort of national a philanthropy group that works on AI and public sector AI, and we sort of asked him what would be a piece of advice you would give to a governor if you were doing this exact exercise, and the answer really was thinking about um, the food that AI startups consume is data, and that data that is publicly accessible and verifiable and regularly updated and open source and clean, and that we can sort of stand behind is a potentially a really impactful draw for companies that might be looking to leverage the, to not have to take the step to create data sources themselves, but to feed off of data sources that are already publicly available. And so this piece of advice that sort of has been kicking around my brain for the last week or so has been around picking a series of sort of priority areas, and I think Sasha, exactly to the list that you just showed, and make and doing and there's a world where the state could have a role in collecting and publishing data that then folks could use as they see fit. And I think we do this a lot already with some workforce data. We do it with other pieces, but having a sort of specific startup mentality around those, and particularly in high growth areas, is just an idea that I just wanted to throw out, given it's just been, as I said, rattling around my head. But I would look to, I guess, Phoenix and Michael about the sort of the need, the feasibility of doing something like that, and the attractability, I guess, to Michael, if there's a good source of data out there, if folks like yourselves in the startup world would have an appetite for that.
I'll come in, and feel free anyone if that wants to interrupt me as well, because I feel like I've been talking a lot. I think that would be really, really great. Like you said, looking at what sectors could potentially that we would want to enhance, and the state of Maine particularly would be really, really helpful. Um, I would say on a personal note for us, our data that we're always collecting is with African languages, whether it's text to text, speech to text. So, and we have to create that data ourselves because it's considered low resources. So having incentives to provide that could be very helpful. I will be a bit of a devil's advocate and state that it's interesting also to see how OpenAI has been able to elevate. They basically stole everybody's data, right? And they did it because there's not a lot of regulations. So we would have to make it be attractive for both the state of Maine, but also for the companies that need data to be able to acquire that data and see how it could be helpful in growing the AI Maine infrastructure. So maybe the data that they create or the data they do consume, they have to provide access to whatever thing that they create as open source could be an opportunity. But we would just have to think about what those perimeters are.
I've got a couple of perhaps contradictory ideas around this. One is I listen a lot to Barbara Humpton at Siemens, who talks about industrial AI and the fact that, we're at the consumer level, we're familiar with these large language models that are built off of data generated by public consumer activity. But the real power of AI may come from data produced by networked machines behaving within an organization, within an industry, within a plant. And the estimate is right now 80% or more of the data that's coming from those machines or is just wasted. So rather than looking at what data Maine already produces, keeping in mind the fact that data has no geography in the cloud, that we should more be thinking about the kinds of enterprises that would be adding value to data that would make sense to be housed in Maine. I can't think of what those might be, but entrepreneurs like Michael and folks, both in our tech city of the greater Portland area and the much larger tech city 90 miles to our south, we might be, I think, rather than thinking about sectors, thinking about how to attract those that would want to set up shop here, regardless of what sector they might operate in, would be a good way to think about Maine's strategy. So in one bucket is preparing that tech-enabled workforce, specifically in an AI-dominated economy. Second would be enterprise attraction, attracting entrepreneurs that would both, that primarily attracted by Maine's quality of life, second by Maine's business environment, third by Maine's workforce, and then doing what we need to have those three preconditions operating together.
Daniel, may I add to what you were saying, just to see if you would align with this? I was thinking the top three industries that we talked about, like the natural resources oriented ones, where Maine has a leadership position, just given all of that. I think there it's more around the state of Maine is probably leading in those sectors, and it makes sense to apply AI to reinvent and reimagine, to continue to lead and progress. But to your point, and I believe, Michael, you mentioned it too, that or Phoenix, you were alluding to that too, that we should be broader than that, right? So in general, the business environment with AI should not be limited to just those sectors, but should allow for entrepreneurs to come in and thrive in the state of Maine, broadly speaking, not just limited to those. And hence, obviously, we want to cater to those needs from an AI skills and workforce perspective and infrastructure perspective, right? Yeah, okay, makes sense. Just wanted to recap to ensure.
I think this is a half-baked thought, but I mean, I think there is room for both seeing where Maine's existing strengths can become stronger with these tools, and then how those can be examples, perhaps, in kind of spinning off other related industries, I suppose, as well as how to be an attractive place to start or grow your small or medium sized business that's specifically in the AI or tech related industry. And again, ideally you would have those two kind of working together, where, as Michael was putting it earlier, you're not just it's not just AI for AI's sake, like you're making specific tools, right, that are useful for people, useful in different sectors that we already have in the state, in Maine's example. And in terms of value add economic stuff, that does tend to be like natural resource industries, things like that, life sciences and others, as well as pretty massive parts of our economy and state, with like healthcare, which has, I think, potentially huge need for potential tools like this, I suppose, that offers further reach for people in rural areas, or it just somehow gets the wait list down for getting a primary care doctor, whatever that may be. Again, this is a little half-baked, but the point is just like, I think there's some integration between where Maine could potentially lead and how that attracts companies that are part of that ecosystem, which then kind of builds a better place for new companies that are just more purely technology focused to build. I mean, I think can all work together a little bit. I think a question that we'll have to keep coming back to a little bit is, what specifically about this AI task force do we want to be thinking about, as opposed to, like business or workforce incentives writ large, which I think is always challenging, no matter what the topic is, to be honest. Because, I think I've had some more of these conversations in the life sciences space, but there are a couple pieces that have led Maine to some success in certain ways with life sciences, which have been kind of spinning off some successful companies and research organizations. But also, there's been a big boon recently just because people wanted to live here, and that was kind of it. There wasn't really an economic reason other than that, but they did want to come and set up shop here, and that is both a crucial part of the picture and also I think a little challenging when you're part of like a policy group. Just like, well, yeah, we want the state to be great and a great place to live, and that's actually pretty important economically. But it can be a challenge for us, I think, to try to sharpen down into like, okay, what should we be doing differently around our topic here. Anyway, so that was kind of a winding road of thoughts, but just some of those coming up as folks are sharing. I do want to say though, I do want to hear more from Emily, because I do think Michael is right in pointing out that MTI already is, and I think will continue to be a pretty crucial part of this picture, because you are kind of the center of a lot of this more technology focused business development. So I'm curious what you're thinking as this has been going on.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Phoenix. I'm happy to share maybe just broadly what we're seeing in AI from our entrepreneurs, and also some of the ways we plan to and currently are supporting businesses that are either have a product that's enabled by artificial intelligence, or maybe want to incorporate it into their business, even if they're in forestry, even if they're in agriculture or an unrelated sector. It was interesting because Scott a few weeks ago asked me to look at interest forms, which is our first point of contact with businesses when they say, I have this idea, I'd like to talk with MTI about it and like to explore funding. And he asked me to track the interest in AI from the last 5 years, from 2020 to early 2025. And 2020, I think it was maybe like 3% of the businesses had mentioned AI in their interest form, to 2025. And this was in April when I was looking at this data, and 30% of our interest forms mentioned AI. So businesses are creating products in AI, maybe varying degrees of sophistication, but it is something businesses are looking at and want to create a business around. So we have been funding support, or we have been offering support to businesses in this R&D space. Again, this is only a portion of the businesses that we fund. We do see a lot of information technology businesses in MTI. That's probably our largest sector that we fund, and a good portion of those, I would say, are exploring AI. But we do work with various other businesses. So we recently launched an educational program on Friday, actually, of last week. So this is very, very new. And we call it Merc AI. And it was essentially, we're partnering with Coursera. For those of you who are not aware of Coursera, they're an online education platform. They have accredited courses from universities and organizations like MIT and Meta and Google, and they put out courses. And they recently launched a generative AI course catalog. So we are giving businesses free access to this generative AI catalog so they can take courses starting from what is AI, how does it work at a basic level, to use case specific applications like AI in marketing, AI in operations. As we did realize that a good percentage of our portfolio really wants to take advantage of this tool and wants to be productive, especially in our small teams, might give them an opportunity to punch above their weight. So we launched this educational initiative. It's starting. I can keep you all updated on how it goes and the feedback that we get. But also too, just broadly through the Merck program, when we put out a survey to see if this program was something businesses were even interested in, there was a lot of interest, especially for people who were unfamiliar with artificial intelligence. They just wanted the basics. But then we also did see interest from those in our portfolio who do have a product in the space, but they said it's expensive and we really want targeted expertise to help us in this area. So we also have our standard Merck program where we can offer grants for businesses to work with experts in this space. We're considering partnerships with the Roux Institute. They have a lot of good expertise there, maybe offering grants for businesses to work with them and others who have a track record in this space to work on more targeted, larger projects. So we're kind of reacting to businesses coming to MTI with an AI idea, I suppose, but also trying to cultivate that within our existing businesses. Maybe a food producer is going to come up by taking these courses, this is going to come up with a new, interesting way to use AI in their own business or a product from there. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, thanks for that. That does also make me think maybe a cleaner way to distinguish a little bit and relate to what I was talking about before is just you have your AI companies, quote unquote, which it sounds like you have a decent amount of MTI, but then you have all of everyone else who might want an AI tool to help with X, Y, or Z product. And actually, it sounds like you're seeing quite a lot of interest in that as well. And the question then is how to appropriately get them that assistance. And that's probably true for 98% of Maine businesses, right? Everyone from WEX to others that aren't at their core creating an AI product, but do see potential value and economic value to just figuring it out a little better than maybe they have in the past.
Absolutely. And this is just anecdotally, but it was interesting. I was speaking with a business that had a pretty mature AI product. Their product was enabled by AI, but they have a larger team, and their marketing person wanted to take advantage of this Merck AI program because they wanted to understand AI for marketing specifically. So they have this product, but not everyone on the team knows how, well, I mean, AI is just so broad. There's so many different ways people can apply it. So even if they do have a product, there are other members of the team who could benefit from this education. So yeah, we see these two distinct groups, but then we also see distinct groups within companies as well. So it'll be an interesting experiment, this program for sure.
So I kind of feel like I'm hearing three themes develop here. One is entrepreneur attraction, and like leveraging the beauty of Maine to get those, who are creating enterprises that we could just get here. The second is the more strategic sector transformation. We know it's the certain critical sectors here in Maine that AI could really accelerate. And then the third is it's the workforce piece, the talent development piece, ensuring that we have what we need to fuel those two. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot. I was thinking about one other area, maybe it's a fourth or I don't know, but the area which are not necessarily where Maine is currently leading, but areas that Maine really needs innovation in. So for instance, the rural community one is a good example of that. We're not leading necessarily in that in terms of like having the right tooling and all, but we really need to create some incentives, particularly for that area. And it might be like healthcare could be another one. I think Phoenix you mentioned.
Can I actually ask you a question, Dan Matz? Workforce, where do you see this group's focus ending and the workforce group's focus beginning? Because it's so tightly linked, obviously. From the beginning of this conversation through now, it's been kind of woven through. What do you think about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head, and really all of these groups are connected. I mean, I was in the public sector meeting earlier yesterday, and I mean, in that we're talking about what levers do the government have to provide services for small businesses, and that's a public sector question, but it's also not an economic development question. And so it's sort of, these are all parts, sort of fragments of the same conversation. I think what we hoped to do is provide a little bit of guidance in the form of those specific kind of questions that we looked at, that we've been looking at over the course of the whole task force's work together, to draw out those pieces. I think it's completely appropriate to include in a list of economic recommendations that we have to make sure that we have proper workforce training and workforce attraction sorts of activities enshrined. But I mean, this is the exact, we need to have all of these people at the table, and maybe they go in a little deeper on specific sort of what training regimens actually come out of are recommended to come out of this work. But it is just a fact that a lot of these are going to have very tightly wound. And I mean, thinking about exactly what you described, Phoenix, earlier of questions about healthcare and rural health and hospitals. I mean, we're going to hear a lot about that next week in the meeting specifically devoted to healthcare. Of course, that's also a business and an economic question as well. But there are we just wanted to give those folks a chance to dive a little deeper. So I think my sort of short version of that rambly rant I just went on is to say that hopefully those questions help provide a little bit more of the guidelines and the framework there, and to say that of course all these things are interconnected, and recommending advancements in one is a completely appropriate thing to do, and that even if they may cross over. Does that answer that question? Kind of.
Yeah, I think so. They're not going to be upset if we come up with something that steps into their territory.
I can help smooth things over. I know them already at this point, so I can. Yeah.
Because I would say, I mean, that strikes me in terms of, one of the questions I think was, where do Maine businesses risk falling behind when it comes to AI technology? And I think that probably the biggest source of that would be directly or indirectly workforce related, in my opinion. Either just not having the people, that expertise, just alone to do a job or create a business or whatever it may be, or just an existing business, just because of the skill set of the people there, just not being able to deal with a particularly new tool or something, and that ends up causing an issue. So yeah, somehow I think it's both a potential source of risk as well as the necessary foundation for potential opportunities.
I mean, the other thing I'll say is to look back at the original executive order that established this group, which did not have this sort of 6 groups that we have here, but it really just had 3 charges. And the first charge is what are the implications of AI for Maine's economy and workforce, and just sort of lumps them all into one clause. And so, again, I think that's a very well made point of a major risk, if not the largest risk of falling behind, is attracting a workforce that is able to safely and effectively implement a lot of these tools. And like I said, I can help pave the way, and then I'll just maybe blame it on you a little bit, Phoenix, and we'll move on from there. Great. Maybe would it be helpful if maybe I'll put those 3 questions just in the chat, just to, or
yeah. While you're doing that, I mean, I think we've mostly, at least in my opinion, I think a lot of the conversation has been framed around sort of the opportunities potentially, more positively. But I would be, I guess this isn't actually one of your questions there, Dan, but one of the other things that did come up overall was, are there potential harms, like actively negative things that we need to be keeping an eye on? And I think we haven't really talked about that yet. I don't know if anyone wants to or has thoughts on that, in terms of, workforce or business risks, that things that might be negatively affected by this subject. But I think if we do have thoughts on that, I think we don't want to leave that aside. So I'm just bringing that up in case anyone has points to make on that.
Sachin, go ahead.
You go ahead.
Well, sure. I mean, just quickly, one thing I see when I work with businesses through MTI and they're looking at using AI in their business, I just wonder if they really know the implications of it themselves personally, and that then puts the business at risk for using their users' data incorrectly. So it just opens up a lot of liability within the business. Of course, probably unintentionally be unethical, and that's a concern itself, but also the business is exposing themselves to a lot of unknown risk that could be very costly for them. So that is just one concern I have now working with businesses and Maine's economy, using AI tools or incorporating it into their workflows or into their products.
Yeah, what I was going to say is I think of do things potentially in that category of considerations for how AI could create harm. Which one of them is lack of our ability to like adopt and progress using AI, and losing, let's say, our leadership position or opportunity for others to kind of like out innovate or out progress, if you will, us. So that's one. I think the other one is kind of what Emily was saying, which is it's helpful to have some kind of policy framework for how to evaluate or approve AI tools that are going to be leveraged, to make sure that there isn't like biases or some negative consequences, which are very possible if it is not, if there is no governance framework. So I think having some governance framework that balances um enablement of innovation and all of those things, but also provide certain guardrails. I think that's incredibly helpful, and it's a very tricky kind of thing to get right, that balance. But I think it's very important to have that.
I'll jump in and say, speaking of connections with the workforce, I think Sachin, I think your both of your points really speak to something that we've been talking about in that context, which is around monitoring impacts and how do we think about what are the canaries in the coal mine? What are the metrics that we can point at to say it looks like AI is negatively impacting a certain sector or a certain occupation? And I think that there's an interesting question here as well around monitoring sort of business impacts too. That is both from the perspective of what are businesses, industry in competitive states, how are they getting a leg up by adopting AI, as well as what are the I think, Emily, to your point, what are the liabilities that are causing adverse business outcomes for Maine businesses, and how can we even know that it's from an AI impact as opposed to sort of other business? How can we control for other things to get to um, those kinds of insights? Um, so open question, but unless anyone knows, but you do, that would be helpful.
Danielle, I had a follow-up question to that. So something that you're talking about in workforce is just coming up with those business outcomes that workforce outcomes, but then specifically for businesses, maybe that would be helpful for this committee to do, is to just think of outcomes that we would be looking to track, or I don't know if that's the responsibility of this committee, but I do think it's interesting to think about that. What would an adverse impact look like within our business community of AI, and being clear about that? Is that what you were thinking?
I think so, but I think the other thing I'll say is it is not just to keep the scope and the scale of this work in perspective. And I think like it could be a completely reasonable recommendation to say the state should figure out a way to monitor these things, and not necessarily come to us if we can't. I mean, if we had a great idea that we want to recommend, that's great. But I think a recommendation about putting monitoring systems in place, or figuring out if there are adequate monitoring systems out there that we can test and figure out, I think that's like a perfectly reasonable direction to move in terms of like drafting recommendations and thinking about, because really on October 31st, when we hand this report to the governor, that is the beginning of the work, right? That's the sort of, this is allowing us to then go out and do a bunch of things. And it's not, we don't have to have complete and total knowledge of everything on that day. I think we just have to have a strong, or I think the task force should have a strong perspective on what the next steps might be that would be really impactful and powerful. Does that distinction make sense? I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have, and I think that's very important. And I think that should be something, from my perspective, should be something that is included, because how would we know the risks if we're not actively monitoring for them and haven't defined what they are? So I think that is very wise.
Great. Phoenix, are there other things on the outline that we have not hit in this call yet?
So in terms of in terms of the discussion piece, I mean, it's just different kind of slices of the questions that you have here in the chat. I think we have touched on each one. I don't think we've answered like fully each one, which is not the expectation for right now. But yeah, I think we can maybe in a few minutes pivot to what we want to do next. But I'm curious just what other thoughts anyone may have before we get into that, just on any of these questions that Dan shared or anything else on this subject. This is the time to think broadly and whatever comes up.
I'll share one more thing, just again, not to, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but just another sort of cross group tie here. Again, thinking about some of what the public sector group is thinking about, and this sort of came up in that conversation yesterday, is thinking about how to ease the interactions that businesses have with state with state organizations and entities, and how to figure out permitting and licensing and what are the implications of AI for allowing businesses to operate in a way that is safe for end users, but also allows for innovation and for growth. And so I think there's maybe a future conversation to be had in that group and in this group around what would be a good way to position to recommend that the state sort of positions itself around allowing for the use of artificial intelligence, and how can we help de-risk things, but also not do so in a way that leaves end users and consumers most exposed. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that that's just another layer of the conversation, especially thinking about from the state government perspective.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thanks. Well, if nothing else is jumping to mind, what I would suggest we think about is, well, here's what I would suggest, and we'll see if you'll agree. What is just one idea that you want to really dig into yourself over the next month before we meet again? Like, could we just divide this up that way of saying, here's a few different themes, how Representative Sayre put it. Michael, you kind of listed 5 ideas. Sachin, you had a list as well. I think there's a lot of overlap between those things. And so are there, particular ideas or subjects, and I don't want to be too broad, but something that you really want to dig into and say, by the time we meet again, you'll kind of have a pitch, so to speak, of something specific that we can discuss. I'm kind of, I'm thinking about this just as we're talking. I mean, how does that strike people? Do people have the interest and the time to do it that way?
Sure. I'm fine with that, unless someone else has another alternative. I would be happy to dig into one of these topics or questions.
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me too.
Same.
Well, we have a few minutes. So, I mean, what would it be? What would you pick? What is kind of top of mind for you, or it seems most relevant for your organization or expertise? What do you think is something you'd want to run with?
I think if I may start, I would think the area of digital and talent infrastructure from an AI perspective, whether it be applied to the sectors so that we can maintain market leading position, like the thought that Dan shared around how do we create a data cloud, for instance, but for businesses of Maine to thrive in those specific sectors or the ones that we want to create it. So just thinking about it more from a technical lens about what that could look like. Maybe something I can do some more research and homework on and come back with that for both the specific sectors. I don't know much about the sector, but like I'll do some research, and but just more broadly speaking, like in a more generic sense, for sure. That I'm sure I can come up with some framework there for discussion for next time.
Great.
Yeah, I'm open to do more research on how, small businesses or entrepreneurs can get tapped into State of Maine, whether it's with partnerships with other companies or with getting funding. I'm open to do more research on that.
That sounds great. So are you thinking kind of like the like this entrepreneurship ecosystem kind of things, how you're connecting to other potential customers or funders, things like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
I'm happy to dig into whatever is left then. I don't know. Whatever questions are there. I think risks was one of those things that was left. What steps could Maine take to facilitate AI-enabled innovation and business creation? Although I don't know if that overlaps with my goals.
Yeah, well, I would say I don't think it needs to be that there's no overlap.
Okay.
I think you're coming from MTI. I mean, I think that you're bringing that kind of expertise around the business networks as well. Probably maybe from a slightly different angle than Michael, obviously, but
Sure.
not to push you into that, but just to say
Yeah.
you have that lens into what small businesses are asking for and seem to need in terms of adopting AI tools, right? I mean, is that
Mm.
fair?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'm not sure. I think our next meeting is going to be in June or July. Is that right? Monthly meetings. I'm just thinking by that time I might have some insight into the Merck AI program and how businesses
Oh,
are
yeah.
responding to it. If this is a resource that they think is helpful, what kind of courses are they gravitating towards? So maybe I can talk about what we're seeing maybe across the board at a very small level for businesses, and share some of those insights if helpful.
That's great. Yeah, we won't be able to meet until July, I believe, just due to various scheduling conflicts. We still need to schedule a time for that one, but yeah. So yes, so there's more time until then.
Hmm.
Were you about to say something, Dan? Matt?
I think I'll just this might be a cop out, so you can call me out on it, I guess. But I'm going to continue to think about crossover here with other groups. I think finding places where we can say this is if we can tag a recommendation as being sort of good for our economic development, good for our workforce development, good for our healthcare, whatever it might be, and trying to draw some of those lines. I don't know. I'm not sure how formal that research will be, to be completely candid, but I think I'm happy to continue to have that perspective in these calls.
Great.
Cool.
This might, first I should say this can change right after this meeting. I just want to have some sense of direction after this, but if you come up with something else, you want to spend more time on, obviously this isn't like graded homework or something, but I was going to say though, for myself, maybe I'll look into the workforce piece, but specifically around business, like I guess the term maybe a little boring would just be sort of the incumbent worker, like workforce piece around ensuring that workers at existing companies kind of are able to get the skills that they need, which is maybe a little different from the kind of new grad pipeline, but related, obviously. Because that's something I'm if we're able to successfully have businesses adopt these new tools, that would somehow need to be a part of it in terms of getting their existing workers kind of up to speed. So I think that I could see that shifting a little bit, and if that is stepping too much into what the workforce group is already doing, I don't want to duplicate that, but that's something that I'm just wondering about at the moment. And the only other thing I would add to that is, the goal here is to come up with recommendations that, go to the governor for things to do. So it's not, I say that just as a reminder so that, it's not to get too abstract in terms of what the federal government could do or open AI could do, but, what the state of Maine can do. I think that can help to remember that as kind of the lens that we all have here. What do you think, Dan? Does that kind of make sense as a?
I think that sounds great. If I can just say it back just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, I think what I heard here was Michael is going to be thinking a little bit about this from the person who wants to, from the startup perspective. What do I do as a startup? I have an idea for a company and I want to make it real in the state of Maine, and I have an idea for an AI enabled startup. It sounds like Emily is thinking about, I'm an established business and I want to upskill, I want to improve processes, I want to streamline, I want to augment the output, and what are the resources and sort of tactics available to me. And then Sachin, I sort of heard you say, what are the sort of over umbrella arching sort of what infrastructure needs to be in place for both of those things to kind of happen. And then Phoenix, I think what I heard you say was something along the lines of, if you are both either in a startup or in an established business, like a larger established business, you still have employees who are going to need to be able to adequately leverage these tools. And what could you tell to your workforce and your staff that work for you about how they can go about learning and growing in these ways? Is that a fair way of categorizing what I just heard? Sounds like a really nice framework for covering a whole lot.
Yep. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, well, it's
Amazing.
better than I said it. So thanks.
That's all I go for, Phoenix. Just a little better than you, right, how you said it. No, just kidding.
Well, yeah.
Cool.
How do people feel about that? Is that missing anything we talked about? Sachin and Michael, I mean, I know it sounds like you had done some kind of prep work. Do you feel like anything is missing from what you brought to the table?
It would be good to have once the congressman is, once we meet with the congressman again, but good to see if he can have something to do with law or the Maine state government. If he could do
Right.
some research on that, I don't know if we need to think about what potential topic that could be, or we can ask him to think what topic could be useful for him. But having that entity would be helpful as well.
Yeah, we can definitely follow up with him. I assume he probably had to get called back into the House chamber. So, but yeah, we'll follow up with him.
Yeah, the thing I'm wondering about is, are we missing anything specific around the specific sectors that we had identified to pursue, where either we have a leadership position or we really need to create, like, solve for, like the rural sector. That's all. And how is that the way we have divided up, the areas that we are focusing? How will that get addressed? So, for instance, I could potentially, as I think about the tech infrastructure, and think about each of those sectors, or do some homework around that and see what emerges through that. And similarly, others look at, like, for small businesses or established businesses, just be inclusive of that dimension, I guess. That could
Do
be
you
a way to
mean
go.
sectors like specific industries, or do you mean sectors in terms of geography or business type or size?
I was thinking, the top three that we talked about, like blue economy sectors, like forestry, or aquatic, etc., or genomic and life sciences, forestry. So those areas, plus maybe healthcare. I know healthcare has a specific topic. Also, then how do we what do we need to do from an AI perspective for the rural areas to progress?
No.
So those questions is what I was wondering about. That if we we should solve for those in all of our various areas of focus, I guess, and that might be a way to approach it.
Yeah, I think that's my initial reaction to what you're saying, is that I think that somewhat inherently, considering Maine, that should at least be kind of part of all of the discussion. And like to your point around those sectors, the marine related industries, a lot of that is in rural Maine. A lot of forest related businesses are in Maine, as well as small and medium factors in rural Maine, I should say, as well as small and medium sized manufacturers in that space. So I think it should come out. I think if it doesn't, for some reason, we should remain aware of that. But I think it'll come up as we're looking.
Yeah, and also to emphasize what we talked about earlier, not limited to those sectors. So we want general
Yeah.
attractiveness and
Right.
be more broader than that. But in case there is something special for those areas, of course, it makes sense to highlight and ensure we drive.
Yeah, and this would probably be a whole other conversation. But I mean, I think highlighting those sectors in terms of broad competitive advantage is helpful as a shorthand. But I mean, we don't want to leave out other more specifically successful things, right? You work for WEX, which is not named in one of those sectors, but you're part of a successful company that is an advantage for Maine's economy. So I don't want to lose sight of that either. But yeah, I think as a shorthand for like broadly speaking, what might set Maine apart, those sectors can be helpful to think through.
Agreed. And I think that could be a conversation that where we tease out, maybe for that first question about opportunities for Maine to become a global innovation center, we sort of give a head nod to some of exactly what you said there, Sachin, but acknowledge that we're not pigeonholing ourselves into just the handful there, because it has such wide applicability. That's a smart way to put it, Phoenix. You put it better than I would have, Phoenix.
Well, any other thoughts or questions or anything before we wrap this up?
Yeah, sounds good.
Good to
All
see
right.
everybody.
Yes, we'll follow up in terms of scheduling the next call, so I don't want to let that go too long. I know people tend to have vacations and whatnot over the summer, so should pick a date soon, and we can follow up in the meantime.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
All
you
right,
all.
thank you
all.
all. Yeah,
Bye.
have a good one.
Thank you.